Hello, this is Ela, and I am showing you now how to color in a very simple shape. So we're actually starting to do a picture of something, but we're going to keep it as simple as possible. We're not worried about shadows, we're not worried about texture or highlights. It's just a question of how do you color in an object. And we're going to start with the simplest, which is just a solid primary color, or a color that maybe you can do straight out of your palette. So it could be orange, it could be brown, but you're not mixing it. You're just simply going straight from the palette and filling it in. So we're doing a lemon. It's yellow. I have a nice yellow in my palette that I think that will work. I've already gotten it wet and stirring it around a little bit. And there's quite a bit in there. I can add it to this water. I could also, believe it or not, just pull it directly out because I have quite a bit there. And then you just rinse this out with water. And then it's pretty clean again. So here I go. Let's see what this looks like. That's pretty good. Not opaque, not too strong, not too weak. So when I fill in a shape, I don't want to outline. If I outline and then fill it in, then it's going to have a harsh line wherever it dries. I also don't want to be afraid of the edges. I don't want to work on the inside out because then you're going to have a reverse outline of the center part. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start at one side and kind of have this blob that keeps growing and moving towards the other side. So I have a nice amount, about a half teaspoon here, enough that I'm sure that I can fill in this entire thing. Another thing I'm going to warn you is beginners often get really nervous and make their fruit really small. And that just kind of makes it a little bit trickier once you start putting in shadows and highlights and trying to get all that detail. So as you can see, here I go. I'm starting on the left in this case. I'm right-handed and it's easier to work from left to right so I don't accidentally touch my paint. And I'm working quickly. And even if this was a very large shape, I could still do this pretty easily if I had a nice big brush and I worked fast. The better your paper is, the easier it is to fill it in evenly. This is a nice 100% cotton paper, and it has some texture to it. If it was a paper pulp, like a wood pulp paper, or if it didn't have any texture, then you would have more risk of this drying too fast. So you can see how quick and easy that was. There are other ways to do this, but this is the simplest, most reliable, most easy to control way that I know of. So now that we've done this lemon here, what if we had a color that we needed to mix? And I'm going to use this. This is a pineapple guava, but it could be a lime, it could be an orange. But I'm just going to practice mixing. I'm going to try and get that color so I can keep going with this yellow that I have here already. And I'm just going to add some blue to it. This is phthalo blue. It's going to be a very intense green, probably more intense than I want. And once again, always testing, what does that look like? It's a little bit more intense than the actual guava. The actual guava is a little bit more neutral. So I'm going to just take a little bit of the complement. The complement of green is red. So I have a little bit of red here on my palette, and I'm just going to add some of that red in there. I could have also chosen a blue that was not so intense, so greenish. I could have done an ultramarine blue or a little bit of indigo, or I could even add a little bit of purple since that has some red in there, just to soften that green, make it a little bit more natural looking. That looks a little closer to me. I like that better. So I'm going to keep this really simple and just go straight in. I'm going to draw guava now. And we're not worried about details or symmetry or perfection. I'm not going to draw the little ruffly part on the end. But I'm going to do this the same as that lemon. I'm starting on the left side, filling in that blob, and making my way to the right. Making sure I can see the texture of the paper. I don't want a puddle, but I also don't want it to be so dry that I'm getting skid marks either. So that's pretty good. Okay, so that's number 2. And it may change a little bit as it dries, that's fine. My third object here is this apple. And you can see I've got more than one color on this apple. We've got areas that are kind of a yellowish green, and we have areas that are red. And it's not a fire engine red. It's actually kind of a little bit more subtle, subdued sort of red. So this won't balance up here. You're just going to have to remember what this looks like. And I rinse out my brush. And I already have a green here that I mixed. So I can keep going, mixing a yellowish green. I can take some of that yellow and move it over here. Some drops of water. It's very pale. And I can take just a tiny bit of that green that I mixed and see if that looks like this top part here. Do I like that? Maybe a tiny bit more yellow. It's better. I like that. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead, and I have a very bright red here. And I'm going to mix it in with that mud that I made earlier just to kind of soften it up a little bit. Colors found in nature are rarely as bright as they are in the palette, and you can choose to make them really super bright, but I like to make things look more natural. So I can go ahead and even try it out on the paper. Does that look right? Does that look like that? I think this might be a little bit softer, maybe a little bit redder. So I'm going to go ahead and I don't need a lot of red. I'm just going to have maybe a little bit more. So it's all about mixing the amount that you need in order to make your picture. So I'm going to stir this around. Oops. I'm going to draw my apple. I'm not worried about the core right now. We're still just dealing with circles, keeping it super simple. So I'm going to hold this up. It's not going to be an exact duplicate, but we're doing wet into wet, which means that I could paint this whole thing green, or I can just have two parts butting up into each other, which is what I'm going to do right now. Take this red. Did I do too little? Oh, teacher, why didn't you do more? Okay, I'm going to put a little more green, blend it down. So I'm connecting these two halves. There we go. But you can see how we have two tones. We have a greenish part on the top and a reddish part on the bottom. We've got a little bit of stripiness, which is fine. So there we go. We've got a wet into wet sort of apple going on. So that's three really quickly. You know, how do you do these three? There's one more thing I'm going to show you how to do. I did this in advance. So this is wet into wet. So we did everything while it was completely wet so the two colors would blend together. But what happens when you have a strong, hard line going across the object? This is a delicata squash, by the way. So in this case, what I've done is I've painted a yellow object ahead of time, and I let it dry completely. You have to be really careful to make sure that it is totally and completely dry. And once it's dry, then you can go ahead with these hard shapes. And if I need some help, I can kind of figure out where I'm going to put it. I can look and try and draw approximately where these stripes are. And, you know, they're all meeting in the center on the right and the left here. So I can kind of use this as a guide, sort of like a football. So they're sort of bowing out at the top and the bottom. And just as a warning, when I paint on top of those lines, I will no longer be able to erase them. So I already have, let's see, let's do I like this green? So when I put the second layer on top, I'm going to get that yellow underneath and that green on top. So I could probably keep going with this green. I think that green is good enough. I'm going to mix an orange. Got plenty of yellow here. Put some drop of water in there. I'm going to make more this time than I did with the red so I don't run out. And if I keep cleaning my brush, I'm going to accidentally dilute my mixture. And I don't want to do that, so I will risk sometimes getting colors a little bit dirty. Does that look like the right orange? I think that orange should be yellower. So there's always this tweaking process of finding out, is this what I want? That looks better. So I'm going to do wet to wet, orange and green going across these lines. So I'm going to do a bunch of orange. Just kind of doing kind of a blobby sort of dotted line, looking at sort of how the design looks on the squash. And I could have made these pencil lines really, really faint just so they're not so noticeable later, but that's okay. It'll be fine. A little bit of pooling, but that's okay. I can always pull it up if I want to. I can dry my paper towel for me to soak up any paint. And I'm going to keep adding. I want to go quickly. Dry my brush out so I don't dilute it. I'm going to start adding some green because I like how there's orange and green bleeding together in those sections. I need to work quickly so it doesn't dry out. I'm noticing areas where it's beginning to dry and catching them before they dry out much more. So there we go. If I wanted to add more orange, I can. I cleaned it, I've dried it. Now I'm adding more orange again. If I wanted to make it more orange, if I wanted to do these little tiny spots in between, I can. But that's basically it. It's all going to be paler once it dries. So there we go. We just painted a bunch of objects. A quick note, if you wanted to do something that was really dark, like this guy, this is a buttercup squash, I would paint the paler color first, right? And then once it's completely dry, then I would mix a very, very dark green and maybe some orange if I wanted to do this side, and this part would be wet to wet. But this part right here, I would save. So it's the same as this, it's just more dark color. All right, I hope you find that helpful, and happy painting.